I'm going to begin today with a story because it frames our conversation in a very powerful way. It was many years ago, I was a medical reporter at CTV News. So covering that beat meant that I got to witness life changing stories and circumstances. There were many over the years. But there is one that will forever stand out in my mind when I was covering a story about a pediatric cardiologist who was truly changing lives. His name is Dr. Ivan Rebecca, and he pioneered a technique called the Norwood procedure. Essentially, there are actually a number of babies that are born every year with a hole in their heart, and it makes it very difficult for the blood to circulate through the heart chambers. Well, Dr. Rebecca figured out a way to close those holes that allow the child to live a normal life. So, to cover this story, I got a blockbuster invitation into the operating room to watch. So, my cameraman and I scrubbed up and put our greens on, and we entered that operating room. When I walked through the doors, I remember seeing a sea of people around the operating table, and amongst them was Dr. Ivan Rebecca. He looked up and said, "Oh, hi, Carrie. How are you? Come close so you can see everything. Come see what I'm doing." And then suddenly that sea of people parted to reveal a tiny baby boy, 18 months old to be exact. Chest cavity wide open, with the heart the size of maybe a plum. And there was Dr. Rebecca with his huge hands showing me the chambers of the heart and how he was going to cauterize this and fix that and on and on. And I mean, I was frozen in time. I mean, try and picture this scenario. This was one of the most incredible things I'd ever seen. And at the same time, it was weird science. I mean, I am seeing a functioning, beating heart right before my eyes. It's like life in its rawest form. And then some amazing doctor fixing the complicated problem and going on to give children a normal life. And by the way, the little boy that was on that operating table, he must be at least 18 years old today and living a very normal life. So, I mean, honestly, it's extraordinary what's happening. At the same time, it's weird science. I have to call it that because you can't believe what you're seeing. I was moved to tears. And then you take that experience and you add in a tour of an extraordinary children's hospital where I saw kids as young as 5 years old in the cancer ward, bald as babies, fighting for their lives, dealing with problems they should never be faced with, but still smiling and just wanting to be kids. I knew at that moment I wanted to contribute and give back. And I became a volunteer with the Stollery Children's Hospital in Edmonton, Alberta. Decided to lend my time and my talent in any way that I could make an impact. That was 25 years ago, give or take a few years. And also I want to share this, what solidified my decision more than anything was this. I was interviewing the namesake of the hospital, Bob Stollery. And I remember asking him, why is it so important to volunteer and give away our time? And his response was so simple. He said, "It's your community, Carrie. If you want it to be great, you have to contribute. It's that simple." Boom. Huge impact that has resonated with me for a lifetime and will continue to resonate with me. And with that story, I introduce our guest today because he embodies volunteerism, fundraising, and community support, and really just the beauty of the human spirit. He is the president and the CEO of the Stollery Children's Hospital Foundation and committed to funding excellence at the Stollery and for children's health priorities. So what exactly does that all mean? We're going to dig into that later. The foundation's vision is to give kids the best chance at a long and healthy life. The Stollery has a staggering, get this, 100,000 donors giving annually to the cause. So you can tell how it's important to people. And the foundation raises over $32 million annually, in support of the vision. My guest, and I love this, he calls himself a professional fundraiser for over 25 years in a wide array of charitable sectors, including health, social services, the arts, and education. His personal motto is to build the uncommon bridge every day. It makes me smile. We'll dig into that as well. Oh, and I should mention that he recently added mountain climbing to his list of things he has tried to do in order to raise funds. And he did conquer Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa in support of the Stollery in October of 2019. We're going to talk about that too. On that note, it is my honor, it really is my honor to sit across from my dear friend and welcome him to the inner circle. Hello, Mr. Mike House.
Hi, Carrie. I'm overwhelmed with the words. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to finally have you here. I've thought about this conversation for a long time. And I think we've had many of these conversations over the years that we have volunteered together. And, this makes me smile. I have to say, you probably know my audience in the inner circle is predominantly women with a few men like yourself. You listen to my podcast, you said that. But hey, you are used to being in a room full of women. I mean, this is your jam. This is your wheelhouse, right?
This is my comfort zone. I'm primarily surrounded by women at work, and I am surrounded by women at home. So yeah, this is a pretty comfortable spot.
Okay. I want to dig into, first of all, your story, because what I didn't realize about you the first time I met you, even the second time, I think it was like we worked together for a while before you finally shared your story that you're a Stollery baby.
That's right. Yeah, I come by my passion for kids and kids' health pretty honestly because I was one of those kids. I was a child that within 4 months of being born, my parents were told I wasn't going to survive to Christmas. I had something called cranial stenosis, which is when the plates in a baby's head fuse together prematurely and don't allow for the brain case to be big enough for the brain to develop over the first 1,000 days. And unfortunately, it had fused so quickly that the only way to intervene is to have basically skull surgery. But the risks associated with that skull surgery were so high that physicians and surgeons didn't want to do it. So my parents were faced with this conundrum of, we need the surgery, but no one will do the surgery. And as a result, I would pass away. So I give my parents so much credit for not giving up on me and for continuing to advocate for my health when no one else would. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, after the 21st time of asking somebody to do the surgery, they finally found somebody to do it. That doctor who did that surgery trained the people at the Stollery that now do that surgery today.
I didn't know this. Okay, continue.
And he's a famous pediatric neurosurgeon. And as a result of that, I feel this direct connection to today's surgeons who are doing this operation for kids. And the interesting thing is the statistics have flipped in the last 50 years, whereas when it was my circumstance, 70% of the children would pass away, 20% would be some form of disability, and only a 10% chance of sort of coming through it the other side. And now it's the opposite. Now there's 70% chance of being okay and a 20% chance of some form of disability and only a 10% chance of something fatal. So, it just goes to show you in 50 years what can happen when you focus on kids' health.
Yes. Have you ever talked to your mom and dad in detail about what making that decision was like for them?
I have at great lengths, especially since I've had this job over time. And there are different perspectives. I think they were both really, really young, only 20 and 21 years old. They talk a lot about the family community that all came together. So it wasn't just them dealing with it. It was they came from small towns, and the entire towns would rally behind them and through my grandparents and my aunts and uncles, and all pitching in because my mother was distraught. They were still in university and trying to make
Oh my
make
gosh.
the marriage be focused.
Mhm.
I came very quickly after they were married, so yeah, it was about community and about how everybody wanted to try to pitch in to help.
How old were you then when they finally had the surgery for you? Were you
Yeah,
within a
so
year?
yeah, so I was within a year. I eventually had the surgery within sort of 5 months, and then I had a second surgery at the age of 2 years old as well, because the the separation could only go so far,
Hmm.
and then it had to be separated a second time to create even more space. And then a third surgery was planned for when I was 7, but by that time, I don't know what happened. My dad always jokes, "Well, your brain was big enough," but if you and I'm very conscious of it, but most of the time people say I can't tell. But if you look at the shape of my head,
Mm.
it is not even. It is actually one part of the size of the head is taller than the other side, and there's a giant 12.5 inch scar that goes across the middle of it, and it's because of what's in there and the separation and all the rest of it. So yeah, I wear a lot of hats, but it doesn't. Quite used to the way I look, so it doesn't
You know,
bother me.
honestly, like I said, I've known you for years, and I'm looking now because you drew attention to it, but I've never noticed.
Yeah, and
Ever
and the
noticed.
head itself, like it's very common with kids with this situation that their heads are elongated. And if you take a look, if you're staring at me right now, you take a look. It's very oval shaped, and you might not notice it unless you meet my brother. His head is normal and it's round and it's
Mhm.
very different shaped. We look very different as a result of the
Oh my
surgery.
goodness. Were there any sort of complications following that surgery, or did life continue as it would as a kid?
Well, one of the things I don't talk about is that this was only one of several things that I actually had to deal with as a child, and the other things are far less serious, but they were also complications with birth. And I think that that's the other thing that you know kids are complicated and there's many things. So for example, I have a fused vertebrae in my spine. I don't have a disc in between two of the vertebrae,
Oh.
which again is part of the whole series of birth defects that kind of come into play.
Hmm.
I've got things with tendons in my wrists that I can't bend in certain shapes and forms, and so uh, this is even though it's not prevalent, it's a lifelong thing. And
Hmm.
I think with children's health, whether you have had a surgery or you've had a disease or you've recovered in any way, shape, or form, those residual things are become part of who you are
Hmm.
physically, emotionally, intellectually. They are the motivators to overcome. They are the impediments to doing certain things. They are the things that shape your risk tolerance. But they also are part of making you your unique self. And
Yes.
I would never ever wish that anything had happened differently because I am a better person because of what I went through.
Oh, I love the way that you framed that. I'm looking back on those, earlier years. Did you ever think or did you ever dream of ending up in the job you are today? Was it a goal? Was it a vision?
Yeah, believe it or not, it was.
Really?
Yeah,
At what
yeah.
age?
From a really early age. So I felt almost from the time that I heard the story of what I went through that I was lucky. I shouldn't be here. I beat the odds. People told
Mm.
me I beat the odds, and I heard these stories of everybody pitching in to make those odds happen. And I just felt I need to give back because somebody gave to me. And you know that that always lingered in the back of my head. And whether that was just kindness to people who are new to the community or to school, or whether it was pitching into volunteer, or and there were lots of other things that helped shape that, but that was always in the back of my head. I was always lucky. And part of that too is this idea that I probably won't last as long as others. That I don't think I'm going to have the same life expectancy
Mm.
because I'm having this different thing happen to me. Now, fortunately, so far everything's good. But
Everything's great.
but yeah, like it changes your perspective. And I've asked kids that have gone through the Stollery or have had health issues if they ever feel the same way, and a lot of them do. A lot of them don't necessarily think that they're going to get into an industry where they're going to give back, but they feel lucky and they feel blessed, and they want to use whatever skills and talents they do have to give back. And so I think that's actually a pretty common thing. I don't think I'm particularly special in that way.
So you dreamed of that as a young age.
Yeah, yeah. And then as we come from an entrepreneurial family, and I always loved business. I always loved the idea of contributing, and to be able to try to marry this idea of giving back and doing business was always something at the top of my mind. I started work really early. My first job was a paper route. That's for those people listening. Newspapers were a thing where you had to read it on paper, and then people would deliver it to your house.
Says the dad of two girls who might not know what they're talking about. We're going to get to that.
Anyway,
Go ahead.
And so, yeah, I always liked business, and I always liked giving back, and it was something that sort of shaped my interests in school, and then ultimately in university, and then ultimately my first job. So I'm one of the very few people, I think, that come out of university going, I want to be in the nonprofit sector and give back.
What was it like when you landed at the University Hospital Foundation in this capacity? I mean, or the Stollery Children's Hospital Foundation. I mean, it's a big machine with a lot of people that are attached to it in a variety of capacities.
So interestingly enough, when my wife and I first came together and we were engaged, we were actually engaged in Calgary, and we moved to Edmonton together. And you know those conversations you have with your future spouse where you dream about the future, you dream about what do you want out of your life? Well, one of those parts of this conversation is what would be your dream job? And I can remember telling Kathy that my dream job would be to work at the Stollery. Yeah. And she said, well, what would you do there? And I said, I would run it. I'd run the whole
Love
thing.
This
is 10 years prior to getting the job.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So again, I think one of the things that my parents, my grandfather, and therefore sort of me, I was taught to always look really far in the future. My grandpa was a farmer, and he would always sort of say, well, this year is important, but we have to take a look at the crops in the future and, what we're trying to accomplish. And so that trickled down to my dad, and it's certainly trickled down to me. So I'm always looking farther ahead, and I'm not afraid to point to the fences and say, that's where I want to hit the ball. And so when I said that to Kathy, I meant it. And then I spent the next decade strategizing on how I was going to get that job. And when it came, imagine not just being surprised that you have the job, but thinking all the way along those years about what you would do. How would you structure it? How would you use your skill sets to make it better? How would you change the world? And I go about this job wanting to change the world, not just do the job. And change the world for those kids who are trying to get healthy. And those kids who are not even sick yet, actually, that we try to improve the lives of our community. And so when you take that lens, it changes your perspective on what you would do. So when I was thinking about what I was going to do with that job and I was thinking about changing the world the whole time. And maybe that's hubris, but that's part of it was just the way that I grew up and the way I developed and my passion for what I do.
You stepped into that role with so much grace. You've always led with grace, and your connection to people, I think, is extraordinary. That's what sets you apart, because you're you're a fantastic storyteller. I love your stories, and I always appreciate when I ask you a question, you bring that perspective through stories, because that's my jam. You know that. I want to go back to when you took over and just shares to give our listeners some understanding of what the Stollery is made of in terms of numbers and volunteers and hours and dollars, and because this is a big, big foundation.
Well, thanks. I mean, First of all, it's lots of people that have participated and given and been generous to make it happen. When I started 7 years ago, the foundation was raising around $15 million. The number of patients at the Stollery was around 180,000 patients a year. 7 years later, this year we'll probably raise $35 million actually. So the number of patients though has gone up to 317,000 patient visits every year. So to put that into perspective, in Alberta, there's only 1 million children. And in northern Alberta, there's probably around 650,000.
Mm-hmm.
So it is the children's hospital for all of northern Alberta for sure. It's got the largest catchment area in North America. So we have children that come from British Columbia, Saskatchewan. Over 1,000 kids from Saskatchewan came to the Stollery last year. Kids from the north, even Ontario and the US, kids will come to the Stollery because of the amazing care that's being delivered, the kind of acute care environment that is provided, and its specialization. So the foundation has allowed for the hospital to dream big and to provide a level of care you can't get in adult hospitals,
Mm-hmm.
which is important, frankly, because kids are not adult patients. They come with moms and dads and brothers and sisters. They come with family units. Many children, 40% of the kids that come to the Stollery are not even from Edmonton. So they have to travel, they have to disrupt their lives, they still have to pay their mortgage, and they still have other brothers and sisters that are in dance and hockey and things. So this is a very children's health is a disruptive problem. In fact, 50% of the kids who have acute care issues, their parents often divorce, so 50% divorce rate.
Wow.
Because it's so unsettling. So if the foundation can raise money to help patient outcomes and family-centered care,
Mm-hmm.
and we can convince the community that this is a worthwhile, important cause that will set kids up to be great, healthy adults in the future, we want to try to do that.
Couple of questions I need to dig into. First of all, you use the term a lot, family-centered care. And you also mentioned that dealing with children is completely different than treating adults. So let's begin there. Let's talk about some of the things that perhaps we don't think about when it comes to a children's hospital and how you have to equip it. Like everything's different.
Well, I want to go back to your story with Dr. Rebecca. A heart the size of a plum.
Mm-hmm.
So the smaller the organ, the smaller the space, the more microscopic and delicate and detailed you have to be. And as a result of that, you need different equipment. But you have kids that are 24, 25 weeks old, premature,
Yes.
all the way through to 17-year-old children who can be man children. You have to have all of that different size of technique, equipment, care, rooms, training, and so it's and unfortunately you can't rely on other hospitals to do different things because the critical mass of children means that you can only really have one place to do this at or two places to do this at, and so it is more expensive. There's no economy of scale of taking care of a child. You and I are different genders and we're different ages, we're different heights and weights, but our hearts are the same size. Our respiratory systems are fully developed. Our bones are the same. When you break a bone as a 12-year-old, if you break it on the growth plate, you can impact the size of a child, the size of an adult forever after.
Mm-hmm.
So all the things that go into developing as a human being happen between the time that you're a kid, and therefore the specialization is far more important.
And I also want to bring into this conversation with adults, you can, nurses and doctors can say to you, or the anesthesiologist, I'm giving you an IV now. Hold out your hand. It doesn't quite work that way with a 2-year-old.
Yeah, if you have a child that can't speak, it's hard for them to communicate to you whether they're sad or happy.
Mm-hmm.
And if they happen to be cranky or colicky, or if they...
The medicine is making them sick.
They can't communicate that. And there's no... It's not like there's a translation box. So you have to have specialists that can read between the lines, have the experience to deal with it, which is why I always say to somebody, if you happen to have any kind of childhood issue, please go to the Stollery, even if it's a broken arm or a sprained ankle or a stomach issue, because they have seen those cases over and over and over
Mm-hmm.
again, all day, every day. Whereas an adult-based hospital may be able to take care of you, but that's not the case that they'll see every day or even every month. It's way better to go to a children's hospital.
And you factor in things like kids, like I said, in that cancer ward, just wanting to be kids and wanting to play, and teenagers wanting to hang out in their own space away from their parents, even if they're in the hospital and even if they're sick. So you developed rooms and spaces that
Yeah.
hold space for those needs.
Well, one of the most exciting projects we're working on upcoming this year is for children with sensory issues, whether they have an autistic background and are on the spectrum, or they are younger. Before you go into surgery, you want to calm down. So we want to create a space where parents and kids can have that area to de-escalate their stress. Because you also have other kids that are waiting around and they get anxious when they
Sure.
see some other kid getting anxious. And pretty soon you have, it's like when you have a room full of babies and one cries and then they all start crying. Well, the same thing
Yes.
occurs when you have stress in an operating room. And by the way,
Mhm.
operations are scary for kids,
Yeah.
and I think in some ways in a different way than adults.
Hmm.
And they're definitely scarier for parents
Yes.
because they have to
Yes.
relinquish control
Hmm.
over what happens to their most precious babies.
Right.
So we do things around the hospital to take care of not just the patient, not just the child, but the whole unit. And unfortunately, there are patients that will be in the hospital for 300 days sometimes. If you have a premature child, they may be in an incubator for 50 days. And then if they have complications, they may have to come back and forth. Uh, Rare diseases, we just had Rare Disease Days in February. Rare diseases don't tend to manifest themselves once you're fully formed. They happen when they're children. So our most
Mm.
vulnerable population are dealing with these rare genetic disorders more often than parents. And then, of course, they're chronic, so they last a long time. We need to take care of the entire family unit because that's where adult health originates.
I love the area like the beach and the team rooms because it's bright, it's sunny, and there are opportunities for kids to play, and that's also important in their healing journey. And you do have space for that. It's a special space.
Yeah, the beach is certainly our primary space, but we have spaces that are pocketed all over where the Stollery resides for teens, for special areas for children with cancer, um, special areas for for kids who have things like anorexia, different areas for
Yeah.
different kids.
Hmm.
But to your point, children don't have a gray area. They're black or white. Either they're happy or they're sad. And if they're sad, they are not motivated to get out of bed and get better.
Yeah.
They're not, they don't understand why it's important. But if you can get them to play, if you can get them excited about healing, you can actually speed up the process to go home sooner. Which is why we've implemented things like music therapy and pet therapy, where, for example, a dog will come to your bedside while you're taking your cancer medication, and you can pet it.
Mm.
And while you're recovering, you can actually feel that de-escalation of stress. It can help improve when a child has to be poked for a needle and de-escalate that stress. Or it can motivate them to get out of bed,
Hmm.
which ultimately gets them moving and is part of their therapy. So there's, kids are not drug tested on, right?
Great point.
So we have to
Jeez.
use different kinds of therapies
Yes.
as well as medicines, but
Yeah.
different kinds of therapies to get kids going. Teenagers, right now, chronic pain for teens is something that is so important.
Mhm.
And so we're really lucky at the Stollery to have one of 3 centers in Canada that focus on pain for kids, because there are different techniques that are available besides medicine, but it is a prevalent situation. The 1 in 6 teens right now are feeling something related to anxiety, depression, chronic pain, and it makes sense. their bones are growing.
Yeah.
I'm sure that I know for me, I had pain when I had a growth spurt. Well, that's when it happens, is in their teens.
That's
So there's all kinds of things that we sort of forget about as an adult that kids go through that we want to try to treat.
So many layers to this discussion, and now I'm going to bring in this one for the people who don't understand. It's a hospital. Why do we need in Canada to fundraise?
Well,
And where does that money go to?
yeah. So the way that our system works is the provincial government is responsible for health, with the exception of things like Indigenous health. So our provincial government puts money into our hospitals and into our acute care environments. And we believe, at least in our province, that the standard of care is such that everybody gets the same standard, which is great. The flaw in that is that we have to treat everybody the same. Well, adults are different than children.
Mm-hmm.
And as I explained, it costs more. There's more specialization that's required. So in an adult hospital, you'll get a standard of care no matter where you go, and you can expect that level to be there. But you won't get consideration for the kind of equipment, research, training, and environment that's required to take care of little patients. And so that's what the foundation does. We just fill in that gap in order to create that experience. And ultimately, we feel that we're not just investing in children's health, we're investing in adult health, because healthy children equal healthier adults.
Exactly.
We also know that when we invest in children's health is actually a social determinant for some of the things that go on in our larger social setting. So poverty, crime, homelessness, mental health.
Yes.
These are all things that have their origins in children's health. And so if we can do a better job on the children's health side, we can actually save money on the stuff we're intervening
That's
on
right.
in our cities and in our communities.
Mm-hmm.
It helps, for example, on the mental health side. When you have a coworker that's dealing either with a sick child or their own issues, it impacts your workforce. But the origins of that mental health challenge often happen between the ages of 8 and 24, when the person's developing.
Mm-hmm.
And again, whether that's a learning disability, or whether it was a trauma that happened, or whether it was a genetic disorder, or whether it was just anxiety growing up. I have 2 teenage girls, I can tell you. I don't know what it's like to be a teenage girl, but I can see it's rough.
It is. Trust me.
And
it's a roller coaster ride every day.
And every female I've ever talked to has told me nothing was smooth. And so those things sometimes have lasting effects. And so if we could do a better job of that when they were teens, when they were in school, when they were needing the help and support, we could have healthier populations.
We are going to talk about your girls and Kathy in a moment, but I want to finish this discussion first of all about your work. And I want to ask you this. What is it like in the day of Mike House if you happen to be in the hospital that day, walking through and meeting patients and the stories you might hear? Because I know whenever I've spent time in that hospital, I walk away, I'm overwhelmed, I'm filled with gratitude, I'm humbled. It's just a tidal wave of emotions that I go through whenever I've had the privilege of being there. Tell me what it's been like for you in this position, in this job.
So I've taken the approach, and this is intentional, about how lucky I am and that how grateful I am. But I am a 3/4 half full person. I'm not a half full person. I am very optimistic.
Yes. Okay. I hear what you're saying.
And what I mean is, like, people is always a cup half empty or cup half full. I'm 3/4 full.
Yes. Okay. I see that for sure.
And it's because I'm inspired by the positive stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unfortunately, at the Stollery, every 3 days, another child passes away there. And you could be dragged down into the sorrow that goes into some of those stories.
Yeah.
And believe me, we get close to the kids and the parents, and sometimes those stories are really sad.
Oh, yeah. I would cry a river every day.
Right. But if you approach it that way, then you'll never get out of it. So I choose to look at the happy. Whenever I'm having a bad day, I go over to the emergency department and I see all these parents, and there will be 120 to 150 that go through that emergency department every single day.
Wow.
There will be lineups of people at 4 o'clock. Today, for example, there will be that. And I just think to myself, thank goodness we have this place. Thank goodness I'm doing everything I can every day to make it a little bit better. And no matter how bad my day went, I'm probably happy that it's not somebody else's day that's in that room worried about what happens next. And the good news is that 99.9% of the time, it's going to be okay. So, yeah, I'm probably one of the happiest people you
Yeah.
meet, but it's intentional, and I
Yeah.
am grateful and I have perspective on how lucky we are to have this Stollery.
I see it. I appreciate it. It's always a joy to be a recipient of it as well, Mike. Talk about the numbers of volunteers that are attached to the foundation. I mean, it's an army, and you've always said when it comes to the Stollery Foundation, it takes a village.
Oh, you know, um, we are lucky, so lucky at the Stollery, but I would just say, first of all, so lucky to be in Edmonton because there are so many charities that are benefiting from volunteerism,
Hmm.
whether it's the folk festival or school programs or brownies and scouts or hockey teams or dances. Like, the people in Edmonton volunteer. Now, that being said, at the Stollery, we're really, really lucky not just to have volumes of people that volunteer, but all ages, all shapes, all communities in making a difference. Over 2,000 people are actively involved throughout the course of the year, which is actually a good thing because we have over 700 events that go on in, in benefiting the Stollery. And sometimes those volunteer activities are related to things in the community, whether it's fundraising or pitching in on a fundraising activity, and you would expect that. What you might not expect is that there are volunteers that are happening, that are participating in the hospital. For example, we raise money to support families through the Stollery Women's Network, and that network alone is over 700 now.
I was waiting for you to open that door, but if you want to go there, because how would you classify the creation and development? Because you really broke some interesting ground in our city with the creation of the SWM.
Well, as we mentioned before, I am surrounded by females, and I was raised by a nurse. So I got to see often how, if you want to get things done, really you should harness the power of women. And
Amen.
if you could harness the collective
Yeah.
energies, passion, and power of females putting their mind to something, you'll have world-changing results.
Hmm.
And so the idea behind the Stollery Women's Network was that if you can, so at the Stollery, we raise money, we thank people, and we tell people where the impact goes.
Hmm.
With the Stollery Women's Network, if we could reverse that, if we could flip that, if you could have the network share where the impact is, if you could have the network say thank you, money will come down the road. And so this was always an intentional thing to tell better stories, to inspire people about what great things are happening within our health system and our children's hospital. And then that inspiration will manifest itself in many different ways, but it includes generosity. And that's why I think, I take credit for this idea. There are others for sure, but I'll take credit for it. We wanted to recruit somebody in our community that has incredible respect of all the people that they meet, but is an incredible storyteller, but also a great reporter. Somebody, somebody who would probe the questions that need to be asked, which is why we recruited you, Carrie. We were a natural fit to this idea of harnessing the power of our female community. And you should be very proud, as I'm very proud of all of the people who have been part of this, to make this a going concern and to really transform children's health through the power of engagement.
Well, thank you for those kind words. But like you always say, it takes a village. And the backstory on that, yeah, I was so honored to chair that committee for 5 years. I've now stepped down and handed it into very capable hands. And I want to say during the 5 years when it first began, we didn't even know what it was. But I had a few of your employees come to me and say, "Can we have a meeting?" And I said, "What's the meeting about?" And it was right as I was leaving CTV. And all they had to say to me was the Stollery. 2 words. And I'm like, I'm in. I showed up. I still didn't understand where they were going. We didn't know what we wanted to create, but we wanted to create something. And it was a grassroots movement, and the numbers grew exponentially over a very short period of time. And you know what the biggest challenge that we had, and I think you continue to have, is women always feel they're not doing enough. They're like, well, I go to meetings or I volunteer, but what else can I be doing? What else should I be doing? And they want to give and give and give. And it was probably one of my most powerful experiences of my career, really, to be able to be a part of that, to see that magic come to life, and to see the impact that women together can create.
Well, I think it was really, so it was on purpose that we wanted you and the rest of the volunteers to develop it organically. So we could have said this is what we want, but we thought it would be better from an engagement standpoint for you guys to develop what the plan was. And what's really interesting for how it developed was that it became first a storytelling and information sharing activity. But then when that got settled out, and by the way, kudos to the group for realizing that females volunteer very differently than men, in that, and this happens in my household, at least in my household, I'll just judge it this way. Kathy runs the show.
Yeah.
She is
Love
responsible.
Kathy. Shout out to you, Kathy. I know you're listening.
She's responsible for our scheduling. She's responsible for keeping us online. She's responsible for helping us become better. But that means that you have these balances of responsibilities of work and home. So you don't have the ability to volunteer in the same way. You have different time slots available. You have different seasons available. You have a responsibility of your own family. You have responsibility at work. So the kudos to the Stollery Women's Network for recognizing that women volunteer differently and that you need to accommodate the complex needs that they have on them in order to engage them differently. And that is the secret, I think, to the network growing as well as it is because it is flexible. You can come in, you can come out, you can apply your skills and abilities that make the most sense to you when you're available rather than when the charity needs its help. Some of the most important things that we do at the hospital I'm most proud of came out of volunteerism and Stollery Women's Network. And the one that I think I'm most proud is the comfort items that we deliver at the hospital. No other hospital in Alberta that I'm aware of, and I'm pretty confident I could say no other hospital does this. When you're in the emergency department, you've not planned to come.
Never.
And although dads will take their kids to the hospital, most of the time it's moms. And so you haven't planned to come. That means you haven't planned to charge your phone. You haven't planned to bring an extra set of clothing in case your child gets sick on you or something has happened. You haven't planned to bring your other children and occupy them for sometimes hours. So what the Stollery Women's Network decided to do is to put as a priority improving the experience of being in the emergency department and de-escalating people's stress as they come in. And so these comfort item kits that were money was raised for and then purchased and now are coordinated through the Stollery Women's Network. These items, whether they are toiletries or toys or clothing or phone chargers, give people a better experience. And Alberta Health Services is better for it. You've changed people's lives. We now at the hospital have breakfast programs where parents who have stayed overnight and have not thought about what they're going to eat, who are hungry and cranky and worried and tired, now get a free breakfast on the wards thanks to the volunteers of the Stollery Women's Network. You're like that. You're like the mom that people rely on when they're sick. And you have translated that into a great experience at the hospital. and it's amazing to see. And I those are the piece of feedback I get is I had an amazing experience. I forgot that kindness really exists in a place where I'm most worried.
You don't often hear those words in the same sentence. I had an amazing experience, blah, 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 at the hospital. They don't all go together, but that's beautiful when that comes to fruition. And like I said, so privileged to be a part of that for a number of years.
Campground rules, Carrie. You left it better than when you found it.
And everybody, do you understand why now I say Mike is a beautiful storyteller? He paints pictures, murals with his words. You mentioned things that you're proud of during your years so far. How many years has it been?
It's going to be 8 years in October.
Wow, that's flown by. What else? What else resonates, really touches your soul of things you've done and you were like, yeah, we worked hard, the community worked hard, this is big?
Well, most recently, so I'm really proud of the money that's been raised for a thing called NICView. So you may not know that there is obviously the Stollery and the Walter C. Mackenzie site. We have 180 beds there. But we also have 70 beds for premature babies at the Royal Alex. And the reason why we have the Stollery at the Royal Alex is because that's where high-risk pregnancies happen.
That's right.
And oftentimes children are in incubation for weeks and months at a time. The problem with having a child that's in an incubation situation is oftentimes you have to go home, but you're worried about your child for weeks at a time. So we invested in technology to allow for you to see your baby on your phone or on your computer 24 hours a day to just check in. And when you're a nervous parent and you're worried about your child, just being able to see them and make sure they're okay, make sure they're sleeping okay, make sure that they're taken care of, because you can't always be at the hospital. That's something I'm super proud of. And that is absolutely the level of care that's above and beyond the excellence you cannot get anywhere if you were just relying on tax dollars.
That's beautiful.
So it's just one example. There are so many, and sometimes it's super small, like the engagement that we have with parents to design the operating rooms and to de-escalate kids' stress as they come in. So in our operating rooms, parents can actually come into the operating room with their kids as they're having their anesthesia, being put to sleep before the surgery, and you can count down with your mom and dad holding your hand.
Gosh.
That doesn't happen in every surgery.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And then as you wake up, your parents are there because we have a system that will, sort of like the airport, that will let parents know where the child is in the process.
That's right, yeah.
So as they come into post-op, you're there to greet your child. You're there to talk to your physician. You're there to work with the nursing staff to make sure that you have all the information and you're not wondering, or you're not off getting a coffee, or you're not stressed out. So just even the information that parents get to de-escalate their stress, those are systems that are best in class worldwide that we have at the Stollery, thanks to people contributing, whether it's contributing at a local lemonade stand or sponsoring an event or participating as an active member in the community.
So many stories. I'm sure it gets overwhelming at times, but I need to zero in on one that touched your life in a significant way. And it was that recent climb up Mount Kilimanjaro, all to raise money for the Stollery Children's Hospital Foundation. Mike, whatever, like you doing that, when I found out you're climbing this mountain, I'm like, holy man, this is huge. But there were how many? Was there 18 or something? Or?
So there were 12 of us that went up the mountain, and it was an amazing group of individuals who raised $1,047,000.
Well, congratulations, first of all. But is it possible to describe, like, what was that experience like?
Carrie, have you ever signed up for something and not really understood what you were signing up for?
Yeah, ish. I'm in the middle of it right now, but not anywhere close to the magnitude of what you did.
And like the ideal of it is so appealing that it doesn't matter what you're going to face. You're just like, this is something I need to do.
Right.
And then you get into it and you're like, what have I signed myself up for?
Yeah.
But the the lack of knowledge is probably a good thing, because
Yeah.
if you didn't actually know and research what you were getting into, you probably wouldn't have said yes. That was
Well,
a classic case in this
yeah, that's
situation.
the reason for the saying ignorance is bliss,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
In a beautiful way.
Yeah, but there was never any doubt in my mind that we were going to do this because of the reason. So that part was never questioned. I wanted to do this because I was inspired by the work that I do every day, and the people that I meet, and the patients that come there, and the families and the staff that work every day. And I just felt like I needed to do this. That being said, then I kind of get into it, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a mountain. This isn't like a picnic or a day. This is 7 hard days where every day you have less oxygen in your system. You will be sick. You will be susceptible to malaria and dysentery and other things if you don't take the right medicines, and if you don't train well, and you don't, like all that stuff kind of comes afterwards, and you're like, ugh. But so much comes out of trying to stretch yourself physically and mentally. In that sense, it was an amazing experience, and I am so much better for it. Money aside, I'm a stronger individual. I have a superpower that I didn't know existed, and that is, if I put my mind to something, I can do anything.
Mm. Can I, and I hope I'm not invading privacy at this moment, but uh, can you take us to what it was like when you finally stepped onto the top of Kilimanjaro and saw that sign and gathered around with your people that were there? And what did you think about? What did you do? How did it feel?
Yeah. So, funny story. So I have vertigo, and what that means is that when you climb up a step over a certain height, you get dizzy.
Mm-hmm.
This impacted me the whole trip. And so I was, but it's okay because they ask you to go slow. So this was working into my benefit. So the last day we had the second worst day that they've experienced in the last 10 years on our final climb. It was 40-kilometer-hour winds and a wind chill of minus 25.
Oh my God.
So it was a miserable day. In fact, it was so miserable that when we went to get breakfast that day, the camp cooks had not started breakfast because they didn't think that we were going to climb. We're Canadians, so we don't know any better, and we're just thinking that this is a rough day, bad luck
Yeah.
for us. And we moved up the mountain. About halfway through the climb, and it was a 10, 11-hour climb up to the summit,
Oh my gosh.
I fell behind. And I fell behind, which is totally fine, through the vertical and through everything else. So the rest of my party basically kept going, and I had a guide with me, so I'm climbing by myself. And so when I finally got to the top, I was about an hour later than everybody else. And by that time, there's not communication on the mountain, so they thought that something had happened, had gone down, altitude sickness, whatever else. And I surprised everybody.
Oh wow.
And I didn't realize this at the time, but one of our climbers, Kevin, said to me, "That was amazing that you did that." And I said, "Well, why was it amazing? You did it too." And they said, "Well, the difference is that we had each other." And I never thought that that meant anything. I was just donors, kids, donors, kids. I was just keeping this thing in my head saying, I can't give up. I can't give up. And it didn't matter how fast or slow I went. I knew I was going to get it done. And so what the superpower was when I was at the top is I realized that I'm self-motivated. I am able to overcome things because of the belief I have in myself. And that the reason why it's a superpower is because everybody has doubts.
Yeah.
And I erased all those doubts that day on the top of the mountain. I was slower, but I made it happen.
One of your greatest accomplishments?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say so. I'm not sure I'm done with all my greatest accomplishments.
I
but
like that.
but I think it's certainly one at the top of the list.
Congratulations on that. It's huge. And I love the way that you frame that as you climbed the steps. Donors, kids. It's good food for thought for anything that we attempt in life. We've talked a lot about Mike House, the CEO of the Stollery Children's Hospital Foundation. Let's talk about Mike House, husband to Kathy and dad to two amazing teenage girls.
Yeah,
What's that life
they're
living with a house full of women, and then you work with women? Tell us about it.
well. First of all, they're far more interesting than I am. It's amazing. I I mean, I love my wife. She makes me a better human being.
Mm.
Uh, she's the kindest person I know, and if you know her, you would say the same thing.
Yeah, I was going to
It's
say,
not.
for the record, I love her too.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not. I'm biased, but I'm actually telling a fact. She is so generous and kind.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but there's this strength in our partnership that allows us to tackle things together. And I come from a divorced family, and so does she. And we want to lay a foundation for our kids that creates some stability that we maybe didn't have when we were growing up, and that anchors us in terms of what's important. And so the things for us that are important and the things that we like to do for fun include voluntarism back into our community. And we're trying to instill that same passion for our community and our kids. And I think we're succeeding in that. So super proud of my daughters. They raise money, they participate, they help mentor kids, they work hard. They're their own people. Our job is to raise adults, which means that eventually they will leave, and I'm okay with that. But if we can instill with them the values that we're hoping will set them on the pathway to success, that's great. And I personally don't know what it would be like to raise boys, because I only know what my experience is like, but I think raising girls is the most fun in the whole wide world.
Okay. I hold space for that, but I'm going to ask you a fun, frivolous, but realistic question. I mean, how hormonal is the house? And I'm asking this in a fun but serious way because, I mean, I grew up in a house with, like, I have five sisters and my mom. Imagine the hormones that raged in our house. It's just a reality of life when you're female.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a. So you know how sometimes people have places in their house like man caves and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So I've adopted the idea that my man cave is in my head, and that way it's always with me. So I can escape to the man cave anytime I want.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is if it looks like I have a blank stare on my face, it's because I'm in the cave. And so sorry I didn't hear it what you were saying. Um, I'm a pretty even keeled person, and I have been around a lot of females in my whole life, so I don't get too fussed about people's emotional or the what seemingly a small detail to somebody else might be a really big
Mm-hmm.
detail to my kids. Um, I I think Kathy. I think it's actually harder as a stay-at-home mom to deal with this than a dad or an adult that works, because I get to be the savior and fix the problems, but I don't have to deal with all of the stuff. So my strategy can be in and out, where she has to maintain a constant regulatory process. I think it's much harder for her than it is for me. Uh, so I just mostly just keep my head down and go into the man cave when
Now,
it's necessary.
I love that story. That's the best. Now people are going to know that's exactly what you're up to.
Yeah,
But
if I look into space, you know where I am.
I got to say this about Kathy. Like, I agree on every level, and I love the love and admiration you always share for one another. And she is an extraordinary human being. She is that one friend that I have that every year on the anniversary of the death of my mother and my father, she reaches out to me and sends me the most beautiful text that makes me cry. But it just reminds me that my people are there for me, and it makes all the difference in my day and in my world. So Like she's a really special human being. I treasure her. That's for sure.
Yeah, she makes me look way, way better than I am. So she will also remind me when things are going on in the world like that, and that's just like you should
Oh.
send a note, and then I'll send the note, and people are like, oh, you're so thoughtful, and I'm like, that was Kathy, just so we're clear.
Mike, I can't have this conversation without bringing up a recent development and enormous congratulations. You have just received an international award. International award. So, on behalf of everybody in Edmonton, I want to say congratulations. Tell us what it is, what it's about.
Uh, how did you know that?
I know everything.
Wow. Okay, so
I
the
pride myself in being plugged in.
yeah, no, nice job. So the Stollery Children's Hospital is a part of a network of 170 children's hospitals all across North America, and that network is called the Children's Miracle Network. People may be familiar with it. Marie Osmond and John Schneider are a part of the founding group of people who put this together. And if you go to a local retailer and you see a yellow balloon called the Children's Miracle Network, that's what it's about. And in our community, partners like Walmart and Costco and Dairy Queen and TD
Big
and
players.
the Brick
Yeah.
nationally support this. And yeah, I was recently awarded the Executive of the Year for all of the children's hospitals in North America. So that's the award.
And what really does that mean to you? How do you process that, and where do you give those accolades?
Yeah, I'm still processing it, to be honest with you, because I didn't apply for it. It was completely out of the blue. Um, I believe strongly that if you do your job and you have passion, and then that's all the reward you ever need. And because it's a team sport, that's what you're focused on. So it's a bit odd, and frankly, I celebrate this on behalf of the entire team, and because they're the ones who are doing the work, and I'm just part of it. But yeah, I think it is great though that the work that the Stollery Children's Hospital Foundation has done for its community is being recognized internationally.
Yeah.
That part I really like, because we do have one of the world's best children's hospitals.
Agreed.
Thanks to the donors and the community that is supporting it. So this is more about acknowledgement that we're so lucky to live in this community, and we're so lucky that we have a community that cares about kids. That's probably the way I'd look at it.
I want to end with this, and you said that you are living your dream, something you really manifested years ago. A dream, I think, too, correct me if I'm wrong, is such a reflection of your core values and who you are. Leave people today with a message about how they can dig into who they are and to live the dreams and to experience the fulfillment that you have, and like how to keep going.
So I would say this is easy to say and hard to do, first of all. But I think it comes down to understanding who you are and just knowing your true self. And then once you see that, once you appreciate warts and all, and that includes your strengths too, then just being authentic about it. So I am a horrible secret keeper if it's my own secret. I am an excellent secret keeper if it's your secret. I know this about myself. So yeah, I'm constantly telling people secrets about things that I am excited about that I probably shouldn't say. But I can't be anything other than that. So I'm okay with that. I love what I do. And people often ask me, well, what's your next big thing? I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't have one. This is it. I love this. I will be doing this for the next decade. And if they let me, probably beyond that. Because I love it. And I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with the way that we spend our time and our family. And I'm okay with the city I live in and the people that I work with. And so my resiliency comes from the comfort of living an authentic life and knowing who I am and being really good with that.
Mike, thank you for holding space for this conversation and for sharing a piece of yourself during it and your life. I have such tremendous respect and admiration for you, for your family, and for all you've done for, the foundation and the community. And I do say this with so much gratitude. I feel so privileged to call you my friend. So thank you on behalf of everyone listening for stepping into the inner circle today and sharing your journey with us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to all those people who make children a priority in their